whenever you guys are ready.
GMOs in America.
The problem we found was, the research question we decided on was, how have GMOs affected modern agriculture in America? For background, the United States Environmental Protection Agency defines a GMO as, quote, a plant, animal, or microorganism that has had its genetic material changed using technology that generally involves the specific modification of DNA, unquote. Altering the deoxyribonucleic acid of organisms has become very prevalent in modern-day farming, and GMOs have revolutionized modern-day farming. This source from ProCrest is credible because Bat and Joshi are faculty of Engineering and Technology, GLS University, Ahmedabad, India, and Patel is faculty of Computer Application and Information Technology, GLS University, Ahmedabad, India. For conflicting opinions, is it playing God or a healthy alternative? The morality of genetically modified foods is heavily debated. According to an article from Franklin Pierce School of Law at University of New Hampshire Scholars Repository, people with higher levels of religiosity are more likely to oppose genetically modified foods and may see it as playing God. Or such individuals may see GMOs as an upheaval from tradition or natural farming methods. Opposed to those of high religiosity, people with higher levels of scientism are less worried about the risks of genetically modified foods. The Franklin Pierce School of Law at University of New Hampshire Scholars Repository also mentions that individuals with higher levels of scientism are more probable to evaluate and side with the benefits of GMOs. The problem we found is that GMOs harm the environment through genetic spillover. The official United States government's National Library of Medicine says, quote, the potential of genetically modified crops to transfer foreign genes through pollen to related plant species has been cited as an environmental concern, unquote, and GMO isolation is likely an adoption of the future. Pesticide overuse. Genetically modified herbicide-tolerant plants have caused farmers to increase their use of herbicides. An example of this is for superweeds. Superweeds are weeds that have grown more resistant to herbicides, therefore farmers must use more to get rid of them. Effects on small farmers. GMOs can help bigger farming companies multiply their profits, but it may have a negative impact on local farmers as they cannot beat their low prices or massive supply. Reduction of biodiversity. The Canadian Biotechnology Action Network hypothesizes that herbicide-tolerant plant systems have promoted further herbicide use and ultimately result in the reduction of biodiversity. The loss of biodiversity proves to be a grand deal because it restricts food sources and habitats for other organisms.
Our first solution to combat genetic spillover is to increase regulations on farmers and laws pertaining to GMO use. This would be intended to enforce and encourage proper disposal of farm waste, which Aristides Sostakis, professor of medicine at the University of Crete, says farm waste is the #1 way that GMOs are introduced into the environment. So part of the solution would be to regulate the disposal of farm waste that farmers do, and so they would dispose of farm waste in approved areas rather than directly into the natural environment. And this would help to prevent genetic spillage or transfer. And another part of the solution would be to isolate GMOs in the farms they're used on, which would be to ensure there are clear areas around farms where GMOs are used, so they would not be able to affect the natural environment as easily. And these regulations are aimed at reducing genetic transfer and spillage through more diligent practices and stricter regulations.
Some pros to these regulations are the reduction of genetic spillover, reducing development of superweeds, and the isolating effects on GMOs. According to Suing Sun, a member of the Department of Agricultural Biotechnology, her study done on the genetically modified rapeseeds concluded that if these genetically modified organisms are not modified correctly or regulated, they could possibly spill over traits such as herbicidal resistance, which causes farmers to use more herbicides on the environment, which can later on harm it. Some cons to these regulations are stricter laws placed on farmers, which could cause disturbances amongst them. It would require more land so that they can keep them at a regulated distance from each other so that we don't have this genetic spillover. And it would prove costly to dispose of these farm waste through specifically transportation.
So limitations and implications. Some limitations would be, first, it would require significant effort to properly enforce, meaning agencies would need staff, monitoring systems, and rules to be followed. It would also require consistent funding, which can be difficult to secure and maintain over time. In addition, legal action will be needed to enforce the solution, which can cause problems with farmers because they might not agree with it and not want to follow the actions that are being enforced. But despite all these challenges, the implications are largely positive. The solution will reduce genetic spillover, meaning genetically modified crops will be less likely to spread their traits to other crops that are already in place. And this can lead to positive environmental impacts such as a better protection of biodiversity. It can also reduce the need for pesticides, meaning less superweeds, because less pesticides would mean that the weeds would not have as many put into them, so then they would not develop into the superweeds because they would not have as much chemicals being put into them already.
Our second solution to help reduce genetic transfer would be to further develop the genes that are implanted into GMOs. And this Mark Linus, visiting fellow at Cornell University's Office of International Programs, says that doing this would refer to implanting genes into GMOs that would make the seeds produced by them sterile, so they would not be able to grow from the seeds, it would be able to germinate, and it would help to prevent crossbreeding to natural species, it would prevent cross-pollination, and it would make it difficult for the GMOs to survive in the natural environment by themselves. Technology like this is called genetic use restriction technology, otherwise known as GERTs, and one benefit of these is that they can prevent the risk of gene transfer to other plants, and make it highly unlikely or even impossible for an animal that eats the GMO to be affected by it. And we think utilizing technology like this would be an efficient way to help reduce the effects of genetic transfer. But there are many complications surrounding this solution. There's lots of controversies surrounding the use of GMOs, which is why, not GMOs, GERTs, which is why they're not being widely used as we described for this solution.
Suppose that these implanted genes would be the prevention of superweed development, and it could help protect natural species. Some cons to this, though, would be public backlash or ethical concerns. According to Emmanuel Omobowell, a member of the Department of English at the University of Ireland, some religions such as Christianity and Judaism have members in them that fully believe that the research in GMOs is playing God, so they tend to stray away from them. Some other cons include fears of reduced biodiversity and farmers having to buy new seeds annually, which could prove very costly since they cannot keep growing these with seeds.
So the solution has many limitations. One major challenge is the lack of funding, which can make it difficult to research, implement, and monitor effectively. It may also be selectively available to large corporate farmers instead of small independent farmers, and creating inequality in agriculture and angering farmers that have been around for ages. According to Farmers, an organization that has supported farmer families since 1985, growing GMOs can be expensive because farmers must pay licensing fees and sign contracts to dictate how they can grow the crop. This shows that how smaller farmers may struggle with financial burden. Additionally, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity limits GERT use, which restricts the solution because there is a convention that already does not like GERTs and opposes it already. The implications are largely positive. It reduces superweeds and preserves natural species better. It can reduce superweeds by limiting the spread of herbicide-resistant genes, because with the use of GERTs, it does not allow them to reproduce, so the herbicide-resistant genes will not get into other plants and weeds. It would also preserve natural species better by preventing unintended cross-pollination, supporting biodiversity, and promoting greater environmental stability, because once again, their genes would not be able to spread because they can't reproduce.
In conclusion, genetic spillover overall causes harm to our environment, and we need better regulations on these so that we can help prevent that spillover from happening. And we also need better improved genetic technology to prevent these negative effects.
All right, let's look at your questions. Let's see, I think Danny, I'm going to start with you. What is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
For my own individual research, I focused on the environmental aspect, and that led to I researched a lot of negative activities and effects that GMOs had on the environment. And looking at this conclusion, GMOs can have good effects on the environment, but they do need further development. So I think that's something to consider when looking at how GMOs affect the environment.
Okay. Julian, how did the group decide to include Chloe's perspective, lens, or conclusion into the overall presentation?
So Chloe focused on the economic side of GMOs, so we tended to take some of her bits on how costly it would be to farmers to have to buy these seeds annually and just the overall price.
Okay. Ms. Cameron, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from the team presentation, and why?
So one of the things that Chloe had researched was actually, she had a lot of good that GMOs had, such as it would increase food supplies if we used it, and we did not include that because we were focusing mainly on the problems that it could cause and the unethical side of how people disagree with GMOs.
All right. Chloe, let's see. Describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about the team solution or conclusion.
Danielle's essay had a lot of, she focused on the environmental lens, which made me think a lot differently. Because like Cameron said, I had the economic lens, so I focused on food security and the pros of GMOs. I hadn't really considered how it could affect the environment, but Danny's perspective definitely played into our project a lot, like how it can create genetic spillover or loss of biodiversity.
All right, good job.